What if I told you that someone could be living in your house without you ever knowing? Hiding in the walls, crawling through the attic, slipping out only at night when you're asleep. It sounds like the plot of a horror movie, but for one Colorado couple in the 1940s, this nightmare became chillingly real. When police discovered who had killed 73-year-old Philip Peters, they were horrified to learn the killer had been hiding in plain sight all along. This case would come to be known as the Spider-Man murder, a name that perfectly captured the horror of a man weaving his life into the home of another, undetected, until he finally struck. The story begins in Denver, Colorado, during the autumn of 1941. Philip and Helen Peters were, by all accounts, an ordinary couple. They lived in a modest two-story house and were well-liked by their neighbors. Friends remembered them as kind, gentle, and quietly devoted to each other. But life had grown more difficult for the couple. Helen had suffered a broken hip and was hospitalized for long stretches of time, leaving Philip to live alone in their quiet house. Neighbors checked in on him from time to time, bringing food or company, but most days he spent alone. What Philip didn't know, however, was that someone else was inside his home. Someone who had slipped into his attic without his knowledge and had no intention of leaving. That man was Theodore Edward Connies, a frail and desperate drifter who had once known the Peters family years earlier. Connies had struggled all his life, living on the margins of society. When he broke into the Peters home in search of food, he found something unexpected: a narrow, unused attic crawl space. Most people would have stolen what they needed and left, but not Connies. For him, this space wasn't just a hiding place. It was salvation. Connies decided to stay. He turned the Peters attic into his secret lair, a cramped room just large enough for him to curl up inside. By day, he remained hidden. By night, he crept out like a shadow, raiding the kitchen for food and water. Imagine the scene. The house is silent, Philip fast asleep, and in the darkness above the ceiling boards, Connies stirs. He pushes open the trap door, slips down into the kitchen, eats, drinks, sometimes even wanders. Then, before dawn, he retreats into his suffocating hideaway. Neighbors later recalled that Philip had occasionally mentioned odd noises in the house, strange bumps and creaks he couldn't explain. But he was a rational man. Houses make noises, he thought. Old pipes would settling. He brushed it off. For weeks, this bizarre arrangement continued. A phantom lived above Philip's head, invisible but ever-present. Until October 17, 1941, when Philip walked into his kitchen and came face-to-face with the intruder. What happened next was brutal. Philip, startled to find a stranger in his home, confronted Connies. A struggle broke out. Connies, desperate not to be discovered, grabbed an iron stove shaker and bludgeoned Philip to death, blow after blow, until the man who had once shown him kindness lay dead on the floor. Then, in a move almost too chilling to comprehend, Connies didn't flee. Instead, he wiped his hands, climbed back into the attic, and disappeared into the silence above the crime scene. When neighbors hadn't seen Philip that day, they grew concerned. A neighbor finally entered the house and discovered the horrific scene in the kitchen. Philip lay lifeless, brutally beaten. Police were immediately called, but the crime scene offered little in the way of answers. There was no sign of forced entry. Nothing had been stolen. No fingerprints, no footprints, no clues. It seemed impossible. How could someone enter the home, murder Philip, and vanish without leaving a trace? Detectives suspected everything from robbery gone wrong to a personal grudge. Helen, still recovering in the hospital, was devastated to learn of her husband's death. In the weeks that followed, the case grew cold. No new leads, no suspects. The house, tainted by violence and grief, was left abandoned when Helen decided she could no longer bear to live there. But what no one realized was that the killer hadn't gone anywhere. Connies was still inside, living in his attic tomb, surviving off scraps in the empty house. The mystery lingered in the minds of investigators long after the case seemed unsolvable. Some detectives couldn't shake the feeling that they had missed something. They began driving by the abandoned Peters house at night, keeping watch. Then one evening, everything changed. An officer spotted a flicker of movement in an upstairs window. Certain the house was empty, they knew something wasn't right. Officers entered cautiously, searching the rooms, but found nothing. Just as they were about to leave, one detective caught sight of something. A faint movement, a shadow retreating into the attic. They rushed up the stairs and forced open the trapdoor. Inside, crouched like a cornered animal, was Theodore Connies. The scene shocked even veteran officers. The crawl space was tiny, barely big enough to lie down. The air was suffocating, the walls filthy. Connies had been living there for months, even after the murder. Surrounding him were scraps of food, old newspapers, and clippings about the crime he had committed. It was grotesque, haunting, and it solved the mystery once and for all. Under questioning, Connies confessed. He explained how he had broken in, how he had discovered the crawl space, and how he had lived above the Peters heads for weeks. He admitted to the murder of Philip Peters, claiming fear of being caught had driven him to kill. The public was horrified. Newspapers dubbed him the Denver Spider-Man, a name that stuck in true crime history. The thought that someone could secretly live in another person's home, feeding off their food, watching their movements, listening to them sleep, was the stuff of nightmares. Connies was convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison, where he remained until his death in 1967. But his story lives on as one of the most unsettling true crime cases of the 20th century. The Spider-Man murder wasn't just about violence, it was about invasion. It shattered the sense of safety that people feel in their own homes. Because if a man could live in your attic undetected for months, what other horrors might be hiding just out of sight? Even today, the story lingers as a chilling reminder. Sometimes the greatest threats aren't the strangers outside your home, but the shadows already within it.